Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's Tech Forum session. I'm Ainsley Sparks, Marketing and Communications Manager at BookNet. Welcome to Selling Digital Books in 2024, Insights from Industry Leaders. I'd like to start by acknowledging that BookNet Canada's operations are remote, and my colleagues and I contribute our work from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Mi'kmaq, the Ojibwe of Fort William First Nation, the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, and the Métis, the original nations and peoples of the lands we now call Beaton, Brampton, Guelph, Halifax, Thunder Bay, Toronto, Vaughan, and Windsor. We encourage you to visit the native-land.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. Moreover, BookNet endorses the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space-making in the book industry. The book industry has long been an industry of gatekeeping. Anyone who works at any stage of the book supply chain carries a responsibility to serve readers by publishing, promoting, and supplying works that represent the wide extent of human experiences and identities in all that complicated intersectionality. We at BookNet are committed to working with our partners in the industry as we move towards a framework that supports space-making, which ensures that marginalized creators and professionals all have the opportunity to contribute, work, and lead. So now on to some housekeeping things. For our webinar today, if you're having difficulties with Zoom or if you have any tech-related questions, you can put your questions in the chat or you can email techforum@booknetcanada.ca and we'll help you out. We're providing live ASL and closed captioning for this presentation. To see the captions, you can find the Show Captions button in the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. If during the presentation you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A panel found in the bottom menu. And lastly, we want to remind you of the code of conduct. So please be kind, inclusive, respectful of others, including of their privacy, be aware of your words and actions, and report any violations to techforum@booknetcanada.ca. Don't harass speakers, hosts, or attendees, or record these sessions. We have a zero tolerance policy. You can find the entire code of conduct at bnctechforum.ca/code-of-conduct. So now let me introduce our speakers. Michelle Sims is the Director of Digital Initiatives at Orca Book Publishers, where she's held a range of roles since 2010. She lives in the woods in Vancouver Island with her family and has a large TBR pile on her nightstand, which I feel like we can all relate to in this webinar. Nathan Maharaj is a lifelong bookseller. He is presently the Director of Content Marketing for Rakuten Kobo, where he oversees blogging in multiple languages and produces and often hosts the Kobo in Conversation podcast. And lastly, we have Sarah Cito, the Manager of ebook and digital audiobook sales and merchandising at Penguin Random House Canada. She started her career in publishing in 2020 as a sales representative on the online and digital sales team at Penguin Random House Canada, working with Amazon, Amazon advertising, and ebook and audiobook retailers. So thank you all for joining us today to talk about selling digital books. Michelle, I'm going to ask you the first question. And then Sarah and Nathan, you can also answer, but our first question is, how does your company differentiate its approach to selling digital formats? Are there any strategies or tactics that set your digital sales efforts apart from your print sales efforts?
Okay, great. Well, at Orca, I would say that there are actually a lot of similarities in our approach to selling print and digital formats, but the primary difference for us comes down to having a specialized focus through a dedicated digital department. So this department was created just over a year ago, and what we do is we have a pretty broad umbrella of activities, but some examples of those are we first manage our own direct sales through our e-commerce website, as well as sales to various vendors, licensors, and other digital partners. We also collaborate with our sales and marketing departments to share supplementary materials, such as teachers' resources, dedicated landing pages on our website, a protected area of the site with resources for the publishers we do distribution for, as well as a separate website for providing advanced review copies, where we can tailor a list of ARCs for specific accounts or by season or for individual events. In our department, we also maintain the Orca digital reading platform, an app, which allows us to sell digital subscriptions and customize collections directly to schools, as well as individual customers, which is a big part of what we do at Orca. So I know that hasn't fully answered the question as to what sets our approach for digital formats apart, but what this focus means is that in practice, we have a really deep understanding of our digital customers' needs. We're thinking about them specifically all the time. So we're thinking about how do our different digital formats perform across various platforms and on specific devices? Which platforms are going to require more of a frontlist promotion, and which ones really perform for backlist titles for us within a certain genre or a specific age range? And finally, I guess I'd say having a dedicated team that's thinking primarily about digital allows us to regularly review and adapt our digital content agreements as the landscape changes, which we know it's doing all the time. So unlike print, where our sales strategies are often more seasonal, our digital content approach is more flexible and more responsive to ongoing trends and consumer or platform demand.
That's interesting. Sarah, is PRH's approach similar to you?
Yeah, actually, in a lot of ways, it's very similar. We do have, focused digital salespeople like myself. So in that way, we do kind of differentiate between physical. I sit in a lot of the same meetings as the physical team, but I think to Michelle's point, we have a lot of flexibility in ebooks and audiobooks and kind of catering to trends that are happening. Whereas I don't know that physical has that opportunity, but it's always a little bit more delayed because you're focused on inventory and you're focused on getting those books out to stores. Whereas we do have a lot of that kind of flexibility to jump on those trending opportunities. We do have, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I would say is different between digital formats and physical. And in other things, we do a lot of price promotions and sales, and that can be very different from physical. The price points are generally a bit lower than what you would see in physical. And so that's also quite different. But again, to Michelle's point, backlist can be very heavy in ebook. We have lots of opportunities to merchandise the backlist and showcase some of the books that, maybe customers have maybe forgotten about, but then they see it and they're like, oh, hey, I remember that book. I remember that book on my shelf. I've been meaning to read it. And it kind of gives us an extra opportunity to put that in front of customers.
And Nathan, what about Kobo's approach? Do you do a lot of the sales and price adjusting? Do you have other tactics?
We sure do. Yeah, that since we don't have print to sell to differentiate from, we're just competing against it. Yeah, value is definitely one of the propositions that digital brings. The fact that it's like that third format, and it goes through its own pricing cycles as well. But there's also, aside from price, there's factors like convenience. The case we always make for ebooks is right around this time of year when people are planning to go on vacation. And the pitch that we're always making is you actually don't have to decide which book to bring with you on vacation. Just bring them all, and it'll be, and whatever you're vibing for at poolside or wherever you end up, it'll just be there, and it'll be ready for you. In the past, we had to ask people to put up with a little bit of a trade-off, that your ebooks, print books are nice, but ebooks are, they're pretty good. It's high definition grayscale screens, pretty good. We got color now, so there's one more trade-off that we've kind of set aside. So yeah, I mean, it's all complementary. Our best customers are also reading print books. It's just really about positioning digital where it adds value and convenience.
That makes sense. And in case you felt left out a little bit in the first question, I'm going to start with you on this one. As a lifelong bookseller, perhaps use some insight into discovery. So with consumers having access to such a large amount of digital content, getting books in front of readers requires like a lot of behind the scenes work. How do you approach discoverability for digital books? And what tactics have you found successful in increasing visibility and sales?
Yeah, there's really no substitute for that physical bookstore serendipity of like navigating space and picking up all of those signals of what's important based on where it's positioned. So we could just, make ourselves nuts trying to simulate that digitally, but instead we kind of take a little bit of a more of like an airport bookstore kind of approach. It's there's a narrower selection placed up front. But we're an airport bookstore with an infinite amount of inventory and a back room with miles and miles of shelving and every title available to pull out. Additionally, one of the things that really works for us is automation. I mean, I know, the AI will steal our jobs thing is a theme. I did a presentation at Tech Forum 7 years ago or something, making the argument that I'd still make today, which is the automated recommendation system, the collaborative filtering models that all Spotify, Kobo, everybody uses. They're pretty good. They're pretty good. All the missing gaps are really about making sure the metadata is robust enough that automated systems can tell, they can read their way through series fiction, and that the connections are there so that they can understand, readers who are into this, we're also into that, and we can kind of surface things by mood and by time where people are in their reading, moment to moment.
What about you, Sarah? What is PRH doing in terms of discoverability for your digital products?
I think a lot of what we do in general is kind of similar to physical in terms of marketing publicity. A lot of the times it's all format that we're talking about. Certain marketing hits might be more effective for digital formats than others. So like maybe something like a podcast where you have kind of an overlapping listener who might also like audiobooks. But, we also kind of work quite far ahead in terms of our publishing schedule. And so oftentimes we know it's coming out, we're able to kind of maximize opportunities. Maybe it's like a backlist opportunity of that author or something similar to that effect. And what kind of drives it to the forefront for a lot of retailers, our price promotions. Customers love to deal hunt. So I definitely think that's one of the things that kind of helps break through.
Michelle, how is it at Orca?
Well, I'll say there's definitely some similarities for us, and I'll agree with what Nathan said about the importance of robust metadata. I mean, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but really that's such a starting point for selling digital books. For us too, we also know that one thing that hasn't really changed with digital content is that customers tend to be pretty specific in where they like to get their content, and it's often device dependent. So part of discoverability for us is making sure that we do have that robust data, but also that it is as widely available as possible, that we're not sort of just telling people, oh, you want this book, here's where you can get it. It's more, can we make sure we are where our customers want to access content? So that's part of discoverability for sure. Second, within individual channels, and so with partners we work with, I would say that discoverability for us is so much about being proactive rather than reactive. I've heard Sarah mention a few times the importance of price promotions and knowing that customers they always look for a deal. And I'd say at Orca, we take a slightly different approach in that we don't opt in to a lot of price promotions. We're sort of making a bit of a change in our approach there. And instead, we're really focusing on helping to curate specific lists and help make sure that our books are getting in front of the customers that are looking for them or didn't even know that this was the book that they were looking for. So that's where developing relationships with individual vendors is really important, and that can sort of go a long way. Example for us is a recent focus at Orca has been on accessible digital content. So we're doing things like approaching vendors that we know do a great job with accessibility features to say, hey, can we put together a feature in your next email? Can we put together a curated list of our books that have all of these excellent features that are sometimes difficult to show visually, especially with accessibility? And then just sort of finally, in terms of discoverability on our own website and doing direct sales, I would just say that, I mean, that's a moving target for sure. We've been through multiple iterations of how to best provide information and access to digital books. And I don't think we'll ever land on a single best way to do it. So my goal right now, and what I try to focus on, is giving multiple pathways to help anyone find the book they're looking for. So thinking about that information architecture of our website, and how do we give lots of different ways for people to find content, and not just through the way that we would do it ourselves. So for example, how do we create an overall experience where a teacher looking for ebooks at a specific reading level can find those, but at the same time, it's just as easy for a parent to find a picture book about blended families, or a librarian can build a collection of dual language audiobooks or teen fiction with LGBTQIA themes. So no matter who you are and sort of like what mental model you're using, you're going to have multiple ways to find what you need.
Sounds like a lot of work. Very smart. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to competing with print, as Nathan mentioned earlier. So we do some Canadian book consumer surveying here at BookNet, and we found a strong preference for print in the people we've surveyed. So 74% of our surveys prefer print over other formats. 17% prefer ebooks and 6% prefer audiobooks. But in light of those kinds of preferences, what initiatives are you taking to boost digital sales? Is there anybody who'd like to take this question first?
I'll jump in. Can I jump in? Yeah. For us, since Kobo launched in 2009, it's kind of just been working through a list of ways that the physical book could be a little better, could be a little friendlier. Michelle mentioned accessibility. Accessibility is a concern when we're talking about, if someone is a big Stephen King fan and wants to read his latest, but it's 700 pages, that may be a person, cost aside, who's got to wait for a bit because they can't physically handle the thing. So, going all the way back to the Kobo classic blue button 2010 model, that was really light. It was affordable. Because we wanted to get it into people's hands. When we started to release, largely, I think our entire lineup presently might be waterproof. That was another piece of it, was making people feel a little less precious about where they take their e-readers, so reading can happen all over the place. The reduction, blue light reducing night time illumination, that's also part of it, because people shouldn't feel bad about reading ever. So we're always trying to take away any reason that they might feel badly about handling a digital device to read. And then of course, color now. It's just one thing after another that we just keep knocking through on our list, where we think books might still have a little bit of an advantage, and we're just trying to close that gap if we can.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, very similarly. I was going to kind of mention how just like technology in general has really, changed, and the device has progressed to a point now where it's very convenient for people to use. Ebook production and audiobook production has made a ton of great leaps in the past few years. There's a little bit more guidance around what type of ebook components are required, or things that provide a bit more accessibility to consumers, where you maybe enlarge the font or brighten the screen, that kind of thing, that makes it easier for people maybe who have some visual impairment. Audiobooks has been so great. We've gotten lots of great, a lot more direction on the way that the narrators read, and just the production quality of the whole thing. We have like great processes from our audiobooks teams. So I definitely think that in general, the accessibility and how much we've improved with the way that these formats are being delivered to consumers makes them want to read them more or listen to them more. It's definitely contributed to growth in these formats. And, back to Nathan's point earlier about the convenience of all of it, I definitely think that it depends on where you are. And I think customers now have the choice to listen, read however they want. And I don't necessarily think that they're just one format or none. It's they listen and read across formats, and you have more options to listen to an audiobook if you're on the road or you're commuting, whereas maybe you didn't necessarily do that before. In reading, like maybe you can't drive and read, well, you shouldn't, and now you can listen to an audiobook while driving. So it just opens up the door for more opportunities for people to continue reading and reading more.
Yeah, that's a good point. In our this is a shameless BookNet plug. In our Canadian consumer survey, we do have data about will people forego their preferred format if the book isn't available in that format. And I think a lot of times, no, right? People will look for it in a different format. They'll take what's available. But you can read that study now. It's on our website. But enough about BookNet. Michelle, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in a bit. So I agree for sure with what Nathan and Sarah have said just about the growth of formats and platforms and devices. So I'll try to think a bit more about the sort of marketing side, about initiatives to increase digital sales. So for me, it's definitely related to discoverability and making sure consumers are aware of which books are available in which formats, as well as where to find them. And it's been a bit of a shift in focus for us to make sure that we don't think about the print format by default as like the main format. So things we've done to encourage that is on our own website, we don't sort of have the print as the main and then digital formats as the alternate. We try to give them equal presence. In our email marketing campaigns, we try to make it clear that whenever any book or collection is being promoted, which formats it's available in, so people know they can find it in a variety of ways from us, or as well as from their favorite vendors. We also have reusable content blocks that we can drop into our newsletter. So we have one for, say, our digital subscriptions that just makes it really easy for us to remind people regularly about the digital content that's available to them. We've also done at a much smaller level when we're working with individual authors. We help them do things like if they're visiting a school, can we set up ebook access for the school that you're going to be working with or for the teacher? What digital supplementary materials can we put in place as a package for you? Or if we're going to a trade show, could we offer a digital subscription as a prize to everyone that's attending, just as a way to show people that may have defaulted to print formats that, hey, look what's available to you in digital, look how easy this is, and look what it offers you. So that's sort of a way that we try to bridge the gap and get digital in front of people that may not be thinking about it all the time.
Very smart. I just wanted to remind the attendees that if you have questions for our panelists, you can put them in the Q&A box at any time. But I wanted to go back now. Michelle, I think originally you brought up accessibility. And Nathan, I think you touched on it as well. But I was wondering if any of you leverage these factors in like your sales materials or your website. Do you tell consumers about the accessibility features that your digital books contain? Things like that. Sarah, would you like to go first on this one?
I don't necessarily put any of that in there, but I think that there's a bit more legal framework around the ebooks accessibility and things like that. So I definitely think that just in general, that is something that is consistent across the board in terms of accessibility. But I think a lot of it has to do with the device maybe that they're using, or the way that they're listening to an audiobook in digital format. So I think I'm going to let Nathan maybe talk about that.
I got you. Yeah, accessibility is really tricky, right? Because it's not every consumer has the vocabulary of what technical requirements they have. What the consumer knows is that their screen reader is being thwarted by this app or this website, right? Or they know that they're unable to, yes, I can adjust the font, but I can't read the menus to get there where I would do the adjusting, that kind of thing. So we invest in a lot of research with like actual humans in rooms doing things together to learn where those barriers are and smooth those edges out. And we think of it like, I mean, if you know what curb cuts, curbs having the cutout so that you can wheel things up, that was initially an accessibility thing for people who have like permanent mobility challenges. But I think we all appreciate curb cuts now. Like even as if you're going to live your entire life able-bodied, a curb cut's still helpful. Sometimes you get something wheeled. So we think about it that way, that all this accessibility, all the accessibility enhancements ultimately just make it easier for everybody. And so, yeah, it's a combination of research and just having a vision, as well as there's some standards coming out of the EU that are going to come into effect next year. So I've got a formal list of things I'm working through for Kobo's blogs specifically to make sure that our people's screen readers happily can read through all of our published content. But we've also got things like the Kobo web reader, which is right now a beta product, fully accessible, everybody accessible in that you can go use it. But we've still got work to do on making it accessible to people with any kind of sensory impairment. But that said, getting it into the browser is the first step because it gets that much closer to where the user is, and then we get to leverage things that are built into browsers. So it's a multi-pronged thing, but we don't advertise it so much because, like I say, advertising it depends on the user having the vocabulary and recognizing what it is you're talking about. So we kind of have to just like we have to walk the walk and just make the experience actually good. And folks who identify as having an impairment will find that easy, and everyone else will too, hopefully.
How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, so I would say that part of what we're doing right now is trying to help consumers build that vocabulary and understand more about the importance of accessibility features. So to that end, things we've done recently is on our own website, we've added a new section to every product page that has a tab for accessibility features. And so as we publish new ebooks and update older ones to be fully accessible, we can indicate which accessibility features are available for a specific book. So we've implemented that in the last couple months. So it sort of indicates what's available, but also gives people the language to talk about it. So we talk about the customizable text and layout, about structured navigation, described images, whether something is text-to-speech friendly, whether it includes ARIA roles, things like that. So even if people aren't looking at it, it's there for them, and they might come across it, or if they're looking specifically for it, it's there for them. And then in terms of our data, accessibility is an area that an area where we would love to see more vendors starting to take 3.1 instead of 2.1, because we have so much of this great accessibility information that Onyx 2.1 just doesn't do justice to. So we do small things to circumvent that, like we might add a line to our main description that alerts customers that the EPUB version is fully accessible. But that's definitely an area for us where, like, we know that as more vendors start taking 3.1, we have lots of like material in the metadata that can be communicated.
So my next question, you're going to cast your mind back maybe, a couple decades. And I want to know what you think has changed for selling digital formats over the last however long we've been selling digital formats. And what has stayed the same? And does anybody want to take that one as the first go?
There
Michelle?
were so many predictions that the medium of the ebook would fundamentally alter how people interact with prose, and it hasn't. What we've realized is below the ebook, like conceptually, there's a foundation that is the book, which is so firm. It's kind of unshakable. We have not seen a pickup of what would be perfectly achievable, choose your own adventure, hyperlinked this way and that, interwoven, non-linear. Nobody wants it. When people read a book, they want to engage at length with a voice, with ideas, with a story. And all we've done is ebooks have made that accessible through different technologies. Audiobooks change the sensory input of that and a little bit of the cognitive function. We've got an article on that on our blog. But people still love books. Books are so endurable. It's truly astonishing.
Yeah, I remember all the chunk it up conversations that were happening around ebooks. Like everyone's going to want short, punchy things, and we want that in our video content.
But here's the footnote, right? Is some of us will recall Kobo was originally a company called Short Covers, predicated on the idea that people would, because everyone had iPhones now. It was 2009, 2008 when it first spun up in the basement of Indigo. And the idea was, well, that's it for full-length books, guys. People are going to start reading pieces of books, and they're going to buy chunks of books. And they didn't. And that's why Short Covers is no more. And that's why Kobo is just a bookseller, just selling digital stuff, because like the chunking wasn't a thing.
I, for one, am happy about that. Michelle, what is your experience and what's changed and what hasn't?
Okay, well, in terms of what hasn't changed, I guess I would say, I think I've already mentioned it, but that relationships matter. And even though so much of what we use to communicate information about books has changed, like so much is done through an automated data feed now, having those relationships with individual vendors is still really important. Having the chance to speak to someone or present a list or talk about what sets your books apart, always an opportunity to increase sales, both in the short term and the long term. Another thing that hasn't changed, although I guess sort of the conversation within has, is thinking about digital rights management. How to use DRM, if to use DRM, how to protect the work of authors and illustrators versus the needs of users. I feel like that conversation started, God, how many decades ago? And we're still having it. And at Orca, we're constantly talking about this, making changes to the way we approach DRM. So that's a consistent, even though the conversation changes all the time and sort of what's, I don't know, the industry stance at the time ebbs and flows. In terms of what's changed though, the biggies that are a great benefit to us as publishers is that consumer knowledge and familiarity with digital products has changed dramatically. So, I mean, partially influenced, especially in the last few years by COVID, when so many people were forced to interact more with digital content more than physical. But that definitely, I think, has made our jobs easier in selling digital content, just the awareness and familiarity that people have. I feel like I no longer have to explain as often the difference between an EPUB and a PDF, and like one's in the browser. Oh, you'll need a dedicated program for this. Like, not a conversation that I have to have as often. Another big change for us is pricing, and the way we think about the pricing of digital content. And I feel like I should I don't know, cover my eyes when I think about some of the pricing we used to do with digital. I remember promotions where we would do things like, if someone bought the print book, get the ebook for free. And I just think about what we did and what that does for the mindset of people and thinking about the value of that digital content and what we were communicating to people in terms of like where the value was. And that's indicating the values in the physicality, in its paper and ink, rather than the words and the story. So thankfully, we've made major changes there. And then I don't want to open that can of AI worms in terms of what's changing, but I'll just say, yeah, those are the big ones that have stood out for me.
So hard to have a conversation these days without mentioning AI at least 5 times. So I think we're on 2. We'll get there. Sarah, how about you? Do you have a take on this?
I like, to Nathan and Michelle's point, like everything that they've said is exactly what I was thinking, right? Ebooks have become a lot more accessible, but they've always just been about the story. And so that's what people want. And so that's what has remained consistent. Obviously the devices have gotten a lot better. Audiobooks we're doing more of now. So that's also something that's changed. I think before, there was a point in time where you're kind of picking and choosing which titles you wanted to kind of make the production of audiobook into audiobook. So now it's like pretty much all books are available in all formats. And I think that's something that has changed. That's gotten really good. Like that's something that we all want, to be able to find a book in any format, depending on what our preferences are. And the convenience of an ebook is something that remains consistent as well. People are able to just take the ebook wherever they want, and or listen to an audiobook wherever they want. So I think that's something that will always kind of be something that's consistent, that people want, that customers are looking for. They know what they're gonna get, right, when they get an ebook.
Yeah, I appreciate having all the books in all the formats, depending on what you want to do when you're listening to it or reading it or sitting with it solely. Yeah. So now we're at the metadata portion of this webinar, and I have some questions about your metadata and the role it plays in selling books at your company. So I guess the first part is, do you use Onyx or do you do custom solutions? The second one is, if you do use Onyx, is there something that you wish that you could communicate specifically when it comes to promoting your digital books that maybe you can't do now or that isn't robust enough? And this time, Michelle, we will start with you.
Sure, sounds good. So I'll say right up front that I spoke with Elizabeth Barker, our metadata expert at Orca, about this. So I'd like to share sort of some of my thoughts, but as well as hers for this question. From my perspective, our metadata workflow is the starting point of selling digital books. And I know I said earlier that cultivating relationships is important, and it is, but selling digital content is often far more impersonal than traditional print sales. For some accounts, your data is all you have to represent your books. So whether you're using an Onyx feed or you're using a vendor's proprietary data template and filling it out manually, which we do both, we're willing to work with what everyone needs, or you're simply selecting titles to pitch to a digital account. Having that robust and accurate data is how I feel confident working with digital accounts. So it's so important. In terms of promoting digital books, We definitely wish, I know I mentioned this, that more data recipients were accepting 3.1 instead of 2.1. It's a major highlight in terms of accessibility for us right now, but definitely that's something we wish. For us at Orca as well, there's also some challenges related to certain formats that we produce, such as read-along EPUBs. So while there are codes that allow us to communicate things like it has synchronized audio, or it's a read-along audio, but that's for print books, there isn't a clear way for us to communicate these still images have an audio accompaniment that is timed with animated words. There just isn't a good way for us to do that. And I'd love to share one thing Elizabeth said to me, which is that children's EPUBs can be some of the most innovative in the market. But if you have too much ingenuity, they often flirt with or cross into the area of apps or video games. So it's still a bit of a wild west. And while support for these file types is growing, it's still really hard to communicate what the product is as a whole and what the intended reading experience is when you have to break it down into these minor, smaller parts. So ebooks just aren't as marketing friendly as their print counterparts when you're deviating from the norm or trying to experiment a little bit. So I wanted to share that thought from Elizabeth, who is definitely our data expert, and we're so lucky to have her.
Sarah, what's the PRH Canada approach to metadata and digital products, books?
So we use Onyx, and that is, again, what Michelle said. It is the metadata part is the forefront of all of that. I'm sure our operations team would have lots to say about the Onyx feeds. From the sales perspective, a lot of it I don't have to touch, which is great. The publishing team often will help populate that metadata. We also have some in-house people who will help ensure that that metadata is up to date, and that will flow out to our retailers. And we do this every night. The feed goes out every night. So for us, it's really convenient in that we have all the up-to-date information of our metadata out to retailers so that consumers can see everything. And, there's no lag in that regard. Every time, every so often with, technical things, there are some glitches, and our operations team is really, really good at troubleshooting these things. They know exactly what to do whenever something comes up. So yeah, again, I'm sure that they'd have their own opinions on the Onyx feed and maybe things that they would like to see improvements on. To Michelle's point too, the kids' books are very different. And so that can be something that's a little bit harder for the ebook community. And yeah, so for us, just merchandising some of that metadata and making sure that everything is populated the way it should be on retailer sites is the number one thing for us.
And Nathan, maybe your perspective on this question is a little bit different, but
yeah, it's God, I have seen the days of Excel spreadsheets passing for representation of metadata. We're long past that. Yeah, we're in such a different world right now. My God, if I had something I would want to see, obviously we love Onyx at Kobo, and the reason we love Onyx is because as a bookseller who operates around the world and often has to develop content pipelines with publishers operating in different countries, time zones, languages, it's really helpful to be able to point at a standard that we're not responsible for, that is being developed on its own with the input of a broad base of stakeholders. And we love Onyx for that reason. So it's great. I think I saw a question about what we would like publishers to do better. I think all of my complaints have aged out. I think publishers are generally doing a great job. If I had only one concern, it would be publishers not listening or paying attention to their digital sales, not making sure that their rights are up to date, that they're offering things for sale in every market where they can, because some of them are kind of rinse repeating their metadata for print. And in a lot of cases, they have rights to be selling those books in places where they have not indicated. And it's to the detriment of the author. It's to the detriment of readers. I will tend to pick the side of authors and readers, but I mean, I don't want to get involved. I don't want mom and dad fighting here. Like publishers, we need you too. But you know, that would be my concern is when folks don't treat digital as its own format with the possibility, like I say, of selling beyond where you have a physical delivery pipeline.
Great. So this is our last prepared question, and then we'll move on to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, audience, let us know. So we were wondering, once the book is published, do the publishers, do you provide ongoing support for those digital assets? And if so, what does that support look like? Sarah, how about we'll start with you.
Yeah, we have a ton of opportunities for supporting different formats and things like that. So it all kind of starts with marketing publicity. We often piggyback off of some of the work that they're already doing for Frontlist. And so oftentimes that will help kind of push things forward. And then after a book goes on sale, there's more marketing and publicity that we try to tell our retailers about. To Michelle's point, we have really good relationships with our vendors. And so that is something that is very instrumental in supporting the book, especially if it's something that's a bit of a priority for a publisher. We have partnership opportunities. Nathan has the blog where there's like opportunities to promote, and other retailers also have lots of opportunities to showcase maybe an author or their recommendations, things like that, to continue to support books once they go on sale through those retailers, the online retailers. I mentioned previously, but I'll mention it again. We do lots of price promotions to help. There's also a lot of ways in which that's really helpful for the backlist, to continue to support those backlist titles and that author specifically. And there's like all of these different ways kind of just come together, and it just really helps push them. You know, more retailers now are offering things like book clubs or picks, editors picks, things like that help kind of to support as well. So for us to have really good relationships with the vendors, to continue to put that forward so they know what the book's about, or to provide opportunities for them to read a book where they can really get involved with it as well. That's all really helpful to continue to support authors and books.
And what about Orca, Michelle?
Well, I certainly agree with what Sarah was saying about sort of there being multiple opportunities to support a digital book through its life cycle. So I guess a few things I could add to that maybe is that we've talked about the importance of metadata, but when it comes to supporting backlist titles, it's such an incredible tool because you're not relying on your staff's memory of previous season's books to go like, oh yeah, I think I remember a book that would fit for this promotion. No, you've got an incredibly fast and accurate way to find that information. Also really helps when you have like new staff members who don't know your backlist. They can find that information really quickly and easily when you've got great data. On the technical side, we also offer ongoing support for digital assets in the sense that we do our best to update files and make them meet industry standards to the best of our ability. How that workflow goes and the workload will depend on, it changes throughout the year, and which books we prioritize changes based on, a number of factors. But we do provide technical support in that we try to make sure that even our backlist titles meet industry standards for different file formats. And on the sort of the licensing side, again, I don't want to open this discussion up too much, but We're thinking a lot right now at Orca about how we use the word perpetual when we talk about digital products and what that means for our authors and for our users. And it's really just, we've learned so much. This isn't the early days of ebooks anymore. We've learned so much. And so part of sort of my role and part of working with vendors is looking at those agreements and regularly thinking about the life cycle of a digital product and doing what we can to best balance the needs of users and readers and customers, as well as the needs of authors and illustrators and of Orca.
Yeah, and Nathan, for you, this might be another like I wish question, but like, is there something that you wish publishers would do to provide ongoing support for these digital assets?
Yeah, I'd say secondary format down pricing would be helpful. And this is another thing that's nobody attending this webinar and probably needs to hear this because you all are dialed in. But a concern, of course, is the same type of publisher perhaps that would not think critically about a distinct set of territorial sales rights might also not realize that they need to revisit the pricing of the digital edition if a secondary format is coming out at a lower price, because consumers really don't like when the paperback is cheaper than the ebook. It doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense to them, and I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to anybody really, because these are usually books that have been out for a while. So I would say, yeah, thinking about the life cycle of the ebook, the way we already know to think about the print book, going through different formats. Where that is a thing, where it's not a thing, leave it aside. But I wish it were more universal, that people really thought about the secondary promotional opportunity on the digital side, when on the print side there's a new edition coming out that will address a different, more price sensitive customer segment.
That's a great I wish answer. So we have some questions from the audience, and I will start with this one as soon as I can see it all. There we go. So this one says, Michelle mentioned some innovative features of their digital books. Does Orca have an innovation team or a team in charge of rethinking the ways they create and deliver digital books?
Well, not officially, but I love the idea of an innovation team. That sounds fantastic. What we do have at Orca, though, is we do have our digital team, which are thinking about digital opportunities and seeing what else is in the market, what other publishers are doing, and trying to see what we can learn from others. That's always important. We have a metadata expert who helps us identify opportunities available to us through data that we didn't know about, or that like I might not have known about otherwise. That can influence our marketing. It can influence how we write our marketing copy, all of those things. And then we also have an accessibility expert who is creating accessible books for us. And sort of the collaboration there, I think, is allowing us to both add new features, meet industry standards, and then communicate that to vendors and end users. So it's maybe we'll start calling us the innovation team. But it's definitely like a multi-pronged approach to do this that requires sort of specialized knowledge from a few different people.
I like the idea of branding yourself as the innovation team. Sounds fun. So we have another question. It says, I'm wondering about percentage of digital ebook, not audio sales among all formats. So has there been a plateau? Are there any new areas of growth for ebooks? Is there any glimpses of that in the pipeline? Does anybody have a sense of that?
So I don't have hard numbers to share, but this actually is something I was speaking with our executive in charge of product and device development yesterday. We were having a discussion about where do we think these color e-readers are going? Who are they going to? Who are they solving problems for? And we've got a hunch, and it's like they've just been in market a month, so it's a hunch that we think it's bringing over folks who maybe were kind of holding out for digital to be better. They wanted a better ebook, and maybe the color screen is a significant change that's got them reconsidering things. So time will tell. We'll see if in fact the pie got larger. But we are feeling like our maybe our serving got our slice got a little bigger. I don't know. But that's kind of the hunch we're at right now. So we think we've not, like I said earlier, I think we knocked down one of those barriers in our laundry list, and maybe we've got maybe we'll see it we'll see it in the data at the aggregate level. Time will tell.
I'll just add to that and say that during the pandemic, when people didn't really have a choice, we saw a good growth in ebooks, and I don't think people have forgotten that format. Since the pandemic and using ebooks through that time period, people haven't really forgotten that that's a medium that they can use now, and so I think that's helped in recent years.
Yeah, I didn't have as nice a way of saying in some ways the pandemic was great, but Sarah put it in exactly the right way to frame it. It for digital it was great, and we don't think we think those users are still around. It looks like they changed habits and just made digital a piece of their reading life that wasn't before.
Michelle, do you have anything to add to that, or should we move on to another one?
I mean, I agree fully. I mostly would just say that I think we're still definitely seeing a settling of the marketplace for the sales of digital content after dramatic spikes during the pandemic. We're seeing a settling, but I think we have seen a change in the digital customer and people who were forced to adopt those formats possibly during the pandemic, incorporating those still in their reading life.
Sure, they were forced, but then they enjoyed them once they tried it. So we have another question here about, are there any particular genres or types of books that you've noticed perform better than others in ebook or audio versus print? Lots of nodding.
Yeah, I'll say to the point that of the convenience of a device and where you're going to take it, like the type of customer that is going to use their device the most is, maybe something that Nathan spoke to earlier, people who are going on vacation, people who don't really want to decide which books they have to take with them to the beach or wherever they're going, and they can take their reader now. But those kind of readers also want something maybe of a beach read, maybe something of a thriller, and that those formats are really, I find, really great with ebook.
Yeah, genre fiction is so dominant. It also comes back to that problem solving thing, right? Where you're maybe the type of reader who reads in very high volumes. So getting the books quickly is important to you. A format that offers any kind of savings. If it's just $1 per book, you'll if you're a high volume reader, that starts to matter pretty quick. And maybe they don't see a lot of value in archiving. They have like holding everything they've ever read physically on the premises. So ebooks really solve the problem for that kind of reader. And so we've seen romance, mystery, hybridization thereof, all of those things. I am of the mind that romantasy exists because digital books are so easy to get that genre readers were drifting out of what might have been their lane in the physical bookstore. But digitally, they've drifted all over the place, and we've seen hybridization, and it's just going to keep happening, I think.
I wonder which hybrid is going to be next.
It's going to involve romance, because romance is the universal. Is it universal donor? No, it's the romance. Romance can get with anything. You can put romance, you can mix it with any plot. That's it.
Michelle, what about at Orca? What trends do you see in digital?
Oh, it's very specific trends and sort of what performs well for us in digital. At Orca, we produce everything from baby board books up to teen fiction, as well as some adult fiction and nonfiction. So I feel like it's probably a bit obvious. Baby board books, it's harder for us to communicate the value of those through a digital format. We still have them. They're still available. But in terms of what is selling better, certainly for us, elementary fiction, middle grade fiction, teen fiction, I'll do really well. I mean, those types of books also perform better across a range of devices and a range of platforms, more so than, say, a picture book that might be a fixed format EPUB versus a reflowable one. Like there's a lot more complexity to working with picture books. That said, there are a number of picture books that do really well, and we see that. I mean, that's an area where backlist can be a major performer. Just as like I guess a funny example, one major performer for us in terms of a picture book ebook is, gosh, I can't remember how long ago it was published, over a decade, I think. And it's called Richard Was a Picker, and it's a little boy who picks his nose, and you'll never guess who loves to pick that book. It's the digital platforms where the kids select for themselves. So again, definitely trends, but I would say that we don't take that as a sign that we should only focus on those areas.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're at time now, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up. But thank you so much, Michelle, Nathan, and Sarah, for joining us. That was a great discussion, and I hope everyone else got as much out of it as I did. So before we go, we'd love it if our attendees could provide some feedback on this session. We're going to drop a link to a survey in the chat. Please take a couple minutes to fill that out. We will be recording this, or we are recording the session. We will be emailing you a link to the recording as soon as it's available. And to all of our attendees, we invite you to join our upcoming session, Details of Description Part 2, Describing Images in Practice, which is scheduled for June 25th. You can register through the link that we'll be dropping in the chat. And you can find information about all of our upcoming events and all the recordings of our previous sessions on the website, bnctechforum.ca. And lastly, we'd like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support through the Canada Book Fund. And thanks again to our panelists and for everyone who attended.